Hi, my name is John, and I'm here back together again with Christ Church and continuing our series on Luke. Today we're in chapters 8 and 9. And it occurs to me that some of you may be joining us and you're not aware that there are actually study groups on Monday that have been going through Luke slowly, and that we've been in this series. And so Sunday morning is like a quick overview with some insights that cover maybe till today 2 chapters. And that's something you can look up the talk online and look at during the week and read through and review what we've said. Plus, it gives us plenty of opportunity for conversation in our small groups after the talk. Luke chapter 8 is a chapter that shows to me Jesus teaching with the example of his life. And then chapter 9, he is teaching through providing opportunities and space for growth and learning. And so that's what I want to take a look at this morning. Chapter 8 Luke starts the chapter by telling us the parable of the sower. Jesus actually is telling a story, and Luke is telling us how that worked out. But again, there's a large crowd. Jesus is telling the parable that we call the parable of the sower, where the sower goes out to sow. He spreads out the seeds, and some falls on good soil, some on soil that's not so good, some on rocky places. And then Jesus explains that the seed is the word of God. And so we're to understand, I think, that Jesus is the sower. Jesus is the one that's sowing, and he's sharing the seed generously and lovingly and perseveringly. He's constant. He's putting it out there. And so there are different types of response. And some respond by faith. The seeds growing in the minds and hearts of the hearers. Some respond by faith, some with their attitude, some are the circumstances take them away. And then the rest of chapter 8, Jesus, it seems to me, Luke is going to be relating different anecdotes that illustrate exactly what Jesus has been teaching about. So the first anecdote, the first story that we come to after Jesus finishes this teaching, the sower and then the lamp, and that no secrets will ultimately be hidden. They come into a time, and Jesus is in a home, and he's surrounded by a large crowd, and they say, hey, your mom, your mother, your brothers and sisters are out there. They're looking for you, and they want you to come out. And so they're asking for a personal time with Jesus. And Jesus responds in a very interesting way, and we're thinking, hey, isn't it family first? And Jesus says, who is my mother and my family? But it's everyone who hears the word. And he uses the phrase he's just employed for the teaching about the seeds. It's the one who hears the word and who perseveres, puts it into practice. And so Jesus, in a way, is giving this immense invitation. Just like the sower spreads the seeds, Jesus says, you know what? There's an invitation to be part of the new family of Jesus. And you are all invited. Well, the next story, they go out and they're in a storm on the lake. And you've probably heard the story or you've read it recently. And a great storm comes up and Jesus is asleep in the bottom of the boat. And the disciples are terrified. And it says the boat starts to sink and they feel that they are in great danger. In fact, Luke says they are in great danger. And so they went and they woke him up, and other versions say, they began to cry out, and they're very agitated. They're very concerned. And Jesus does an interesting thing. As soon as he calms down the storm, the storm subsides, everything is calm. And he says to them, verse 25, where is your faith? And they're amazed. And so I'm going to be looking for that question throughout the next couple of chapters when Jesus comes into, he encounters different people. I'm going to be looking for that question from Jesus. Where is your faith? And so they cross over and they get to a place, and Luke spends some considerable time telling the story of a man who's demon possessed. He's crazy. And what he does is show how Jesus, with great patience, heals the man, casts out the demon, heals the man, spends time with him, orients him, counsels him, and is very present with him. And so that's an amazing, instructive situation, because in chapter 9, he's going to be sending his disciples out. And he's showing them with his life the importance of an individual, even an individual who apparently is crazy and has nothing to offer that appears to be good. And Jesus tells him, return home, verse 39 of chapter 8. Return home and tell how much God has done for you. And so what an amazing experience that man has had. And he goes home with his heart filled and begins to tell, they say, all over town how much Jesus had done for him. And so then there's another interesting story, and it's the story of Jairus, a ruler of the synagogue, and he comes and he falls at the feet of Jesus, pleading for the life of his daughter, who is sick and dying. And it reminded me of the story of the Roman centurion, just a chapter ago in chapter 7. Only the centurion sent messengers and eventually told Jesus, look, you don't even have to come to my house. Just say the word and it will be done. But here Jairus comes, and Luke is interesting because Luke names Jairus 4 times in the text. Jairus, the ruler of the synagogue, and Jairus, and Jairus, and Jairus, 4 times until they get to the house of Jairus. And then he says in verse 51, the child's father and mother. And so I wondered, I said, why did he suddenly switch to calling them the father and the mother? And I realized, well, it's because it's the first time the mother is present. She's been home with the daughter at the house, and Jairus has been out and out in public. He's a person that is known by his identity as ruler of the synagogue and his name. But when they're in the home, Jesus honors the presence of the mother, and Luke records it by not having Jairus, this important person, and his wife, but the father and the mother. And he puts them on a level playing field, and he's honoring the position and the role and the significance of each one of them in that home, in that relationship. And so I think that's significant. And Jesus says, stop wailing. She's not dead. She's asleep. And in verse 54, he says, my child, get up. And her spirit returned, and at once she stood up. And her parents were astonished, verse 56. But Jesus told them not to tell anyone what had happened. Now that's very different from what he had told the man he had healed who was demon possessed. He said, go home and tell people what God has done for you. And so there's some difference there. And so Jesus is aware of the significance of the ruler of the synagogue perhaps talking, and the other man, and maybe there's some social things that I don't know for sure. We could talk more about it. But Jesus is aware of the need and the situation of each individual. And so Luke has presented him in chapter 8 as being powerful, but being patient, and being very present and very personal with the individuals that he works with. And so even in the crowd that was pressing up against him, Jesus was aware while he was walking on the way to Jairus' house of another woman who came and threw himself at her feet and reached and touched so that she could be healed. And he said, I felt power go out from me. Who touched me? And the question always is, did Jesus know, or was he just asking? Was he giving an example, an illustration? And he just wanted the woman to identify herself? Or did he really not know? Now it's clear that he had the self-awareness. He's present in the moment to say, I know what's going on around me and the people, and I know that I've been touched. And he wanted to address in person this lady. And so Jesus is very personal, and he's interested, and he cares about our individual situation. So chapter 9 comes and everything changes, because now Jesus is sending out his 12 chosen apostles. And he says that the 12 that he had selected earlier, these 12 are now going to go out and do what they have watched and seen and learned from me. And so as they go out, he gives them instructions, and the first challenge is to feed the multitude. And Jesus helps, he kind of walks them through it. He helps them. He says, okay, do this. And the disciples do it. And they're amazed. But now they are the ones that are actually touching the people and walking with the people and being active in this opportunity for growth and learning. And so Jesus has that in mind, I think, for each one of his disciples. He has that in mind for us, that we're going to be put in awkward and new and unusual situations where Jesus is there encouraging and saying, do what is right, do what is loving, be generous, share the faith and the life and the light and the love that you've learned from me. And so that's what they're doing. And then he says, he gives them an opportunity to express their doubts and to express the truths that they've learned. And he says, you know, who do you really think that I am? Who do the people say that I am? And who do you think that I am? And they talk about it in the intimacy of their friendship and their group, just like he asked them in the boat. He said, you know, guys, where is your faith? Where is your faith in a moment of crisis? And I wonder, in a moment of crisis, and our world is in crisis, and people are standing up and they're shouting and they're yelling and they're terrified, some, and others just getting into the chaos of the moment. And Jesus was peacefully sleeping, and he says, you know, in some way, whether you see it or not, whether you experience it or not, God is in control. Where's your faith? Trust in the process. And so here he's asking them, who am I? And so there's some interesting talk about that, and he takes 3 of them up on the mountain, and they experience like a vision and an unreal, amazing situation where they're able to see Jesus with heavenly beings. Moses and Elijah are there with them. They call it the Transfiguration. And that's a fascinating story as Jesus gives them some more insight as they've been acting in obedience and putting into practice things. He gives them some greater insight into who he is. So as we serve by faith, we'll grow in our knowledge and experience of God's grace and work in the world. And he comes down, and some of the disciples are trying to heal a boy who is demon possessed, and they're not able to do that. And so what can we learn about Christ's teaching from that that's good for us? I see his love in allowing them even to fail. And so we know that if you're training somebody, if you're teaching somebody, you have to give them, I have to give them opportunity to make mistakes. And Jesus gives his followers those opportunities. And you know what? We've never seen that question again. Where is your faith? Jesus is not coming against us with recriminations, with hard questions. Where is your faith? What's wrong with you? Instead, he's helping and he's guiding. And he asks that question in the intimacy of the closed circle of his friends to say, come on, guys, I want you to trust in the process. So Jesus helps them out. He heals the boy. And then we find the debates that come up among the disciples. And again, I see the proof of Jesus' love and his mercy. And because he hears their arguments and he doesn't step in and shut it down and say, no, we don't do that here. Luke even records it because now they're having the confidence and the trust that they can even express their doubts and their different opinions. And they do have very different opinions and even their disagreements. And so as these close disciples begin to express that, we see in the greater multitude around them, in the town that they go into, people resist Jesus, and then different individuals come up with their different expectations and motivations and lack of commitment, and they say, well, Jesus, I want to follow you, but I'm not sure. I want to do some other things first. And Jesus goes all the way back to what he's been teaching since the beginning of chapter 8 and really since the beginning of his ministry. And he says, you know what, if you want to follow me, there's a cost. There's a commitment that needs to be made. So just make following me the priority. All these things will fall into place. And so Jesus, it's a beautiful thing. His love, his interest, his patience, his presence, his power, but the personal way in which he invites each of us to be part of his family, the new family in Jesus. So thank you for listening, for studying, for reading, and for hearing and accepting the invitation to come and follow Christ. With your doubts, with your fears, with your little faith or your large faith, follow him, and he's going to help walk you through the difficult stages of your life. May God bless you.